I'm speaking here on behalf of the Artist Collective Gold, Getting Through Life's Darkness. And that's why we were interested in your book, Respark, where you talk about igniting hope and joy after trauma. And there seemed to us to be a sort of shared impulse here, the sense of a journey, a passing through, an overcoming by going through, a route to travel towards a destination. And I don't know if I'm imposing that or if you feel any of what I'm saying there sort of chimes with what you were pursuing in the book and your thoughts about sparking.
Definitely. So there hopefully is a journey. One of the things I got interested in that got me interested in writing the book is the fact that people get stuck. So they get stuck in a place where there is no journey and there is very little life and there's a lot of darkness. And that's kind of closing in and a closing down. And you might think of that as in the metaphor of, in a way, a plant closing down in danger, or any animal going dead or numb. And the nervous system does exactly the same thing. In fact, the deep cells in our body do exactly the same thing. Energy production stops, spark stops, we go still, quiet, and it's a very good survival response. But it's possible to get stuck in it because the body or the nervous system or the cells, like the mitochondria in the body, don't know that it's safe to unwind and come out again. So that I'm really interested in how we help people appropriately come out of a state of deadness, numbing, shutdown, and begin to undergo that journey where they begin to feel some life, some energy, some hope again.
And I think for us also, as we came across your book, reading it, we were struck how, as artists, we talk about trying to make tools that let us grasp the world in particular, perhaps new ways. And for me, the terms that you came up with allowed me to grasp the world in new ways.
Great.
So I wonder if we might talk through, just very briefly, some of those terms. I'm thinking spark, despark, safening, and resetting and rebooting. We could touch.
Okay.
That would be wonderful.
Okay. So there's no life without energy. And energy requires, so spark is a kind of metaphor for energy. And we all know when we lose our mojo, when we lose our spark, when we feel flat, dead, and shut down. So I think that's in a way is quite simple, quite straightforward. We can also have too much energy. And I also spoke about this in the book. You know, some people can be over-energized, and underneath that energy is pain, despair, and difficult feelings that need facing. And that's different from having too little energy. Certainly in my field, I find that actually it's quite hard to help people who've got too little energy. Partly they don't come for help, or they don't get referred for help with their children. They don't attract attention. They feel dead, flat, shut down. So this would be a very appropriate trauma response. So if you imagine that you're being, I don't know, attacked by a predator or something really, really dangerous. There were no cars in our ancestral past, but there were predators. And there could be other humans, or there could be other animals. And in the face of a serious predator, the right thing to do is to freeze, to orient, to check how safe something is. And in that moment, you still got energy, you still got spark. And you can, more rarely than people think, I think, but you can go into a fight response to attack the predator. You might be more likely to go into a flight response. These are very different systems in the body and the nervous system and the mind. So, and that requires a lot of energy. Hence, actually, people who've had a lot of trauma often want to do a lot of running and physical activity. But if those things fail, you have very little choice. If the predator's about to bite you on the neck, and then what happens is we go flat, we go numb, we go floppy. And these are really good survival responses. At the very worst, you won't feel any pain because your body will release all kinds of opioids and hormones and things that you couldn't possibly, which would be miles better than anything you could buy on the street. So, but also most self-respecting predators don't tend to want to kill and eat something that might already be dead. And so they often tend to leave the dead thing alone. And so this idea of playing dead, which you might see on videos of possums, for example, or other animals, is a really, really helpful survival response. Which is partly, of course, why these genes have survived and then get passed on to other generations through. It's a very, very classic mammalian response. In fact, pre-mammalian response. Reptiles do it as well. And so the appropriate thing in life is that a predator comes along, you're a lion, you come and you look like you're going to kill me. I'm a kind of I don't know what I am, an impala or something, and then I go floppy, look like I'm dead. The lion looks at me, they can see that I'm barely breathing. My skin tone's gone flat, my eyes look, and look like I might well be dead, or at least very, very ill at the best. And the lion might think this isn't a good thing to eat at that point. And literally, I'm not breathing, I'm barely conscious, I'm barely alive. And then the lion walks away, and then I might get up and run off. Now, normally then you're off in the next field, eating grass, whatever impala do, and not giving it much thought. Or you might do a bit of shaking and come back into, and some of the animals do that as well. But what tends to happen in the wild is that this only happens once, which actually can often be the case with a road accident as well, is that it happens once, and you don't have an expectation of low. If you're really unlucky, I mean, think of Oscar Wilde, once is unlucky, twice, 3 times is careless, but it's unlikely that you're going to get attacked by predators that many times unless you've got an injury of some kind. And so, but in humans, if there's a lot of early trauma or ongoing trauma, then we might go into those responses more often, and we don't then really understand when it's safe to come out of them. So the term, I'm using the term desparking as something that might happen after trauma, and you might go into dissociated states, and that, for example, if somebody's been abused, they might be outside their body watching the trauma taking place, those kinds of things, and kind of out of body dissociative experiences. And that's partly why it's so important to get back into the body. If that has happened a lot, people are outside their body most of the time, so they're not living a life in the world in their bodies. And so the journey for them is then to try to help them come back slowly and surely into their bodies through what we might call safening, which is giving a message to the nervous system that it's safe enough to kind of, in a way, uncoil the danger signals. So there's the idea of something called the cell danger response, very deep in the subcells of our bodies, these mitochondria, and they will give danger signals. And this is often what you see in inflammatory diseases, all kinds of things where the body's closing down because they see constant danger. And it's very similar in trauma. So you have to somehow, you can get stuck in inflammatory conditions. We see it in long COVID. You get stuck in trauma responses. And so we have to somehow convey to the nervous system that it's safe to breathe a bit more deeply, to feel your feet on the ground. If your whole point, if your survival response has been not to feel anything in your body, and that's happened a lot, then of course you're not going to come back and feel things in your body, because you're going to feel horrendous things. You might have flashbacks, all kinds of stuff. So it has to be a slow, careful, incremental process. So if somebody's had a one-off trauma, like a car accident, they have also had a life experience up until that moment. Mm-hmm. So some of them will come in and they've had a pretty happy, ordinary life. A few bad things have happened. They've got a bit of resilience to get through things. Other people would have had a lot of scary things happened. So the car accident might then give rise to a shutting down, which they don't know at a very deep cellular level, they don't know how to come out of. And so the concept of safening is about trying to convey, I mean, it's not verbally, it's utterly not cognitive, but trying to convey that there is a thing called safeness that we might experience. And it's not safety. Safety is safety from something. Safeness is a kind of sense in our whole being that actually the world can feel safe. You might almost think about it as a spiritual concept, or Winnicott, the psychoanalyst, talked about it as a kind of sense that actually I know that the world's okay because my mum's there when I need her, or whatever metaphor we use. And so for many of the shutdown people, it feels like a huge, huge risk to come back into life, to feel yourself in your body, but also to find some energy and some life, it can feel really, really, really terrifying. And so that's partly where courage comes in, and hope and joy and excitement. And for many of us, excitement and anxiety, same body parts, same body symptoms, fast breathing, we don't always know the difference. And people who have been in these situations, they really need help in understanding these differences, I think. And so in a way, there's a psychoanalytic concept called the life giver. A guy called Neville Symington came up with the idea, which is that and it's an unconscious thing. So it's like you can't kind of create or pour water on a life giver and get it to come back alive again. But when you feel safe enough, it kind of spontaneously happens. A bit like two children won't play an imaginary game, or actors even, if you're really, really stressed. It just won't happen. You won't have anything very imaginative going on, or creative or playful. Once you feel relaxed, if you're a child, often playfulness just happens, imagination, creativity. It's really, really exciting. And it's the same really with these processes, that somehow when you feel safe enough, then you can trigger these possibilities for a life giver in a way to come back to life and be a bit wild, be a bit excited, be a bit playful, but hopeful. But that's the worst thing to do if somebody's overly traumatized and stuck in a danger response. So I don't know if that's the kind of journey. Those are the staging posts that I see used as a metaphor really to help make sense and bring people to life. There are other people who've never had anything good, who've maybe been, I don't know, been reared in a very depriving orphanage where they've never had any input. They haven't de-sparked. They've never sparked. They're unsparked,
yeah,
if you like. And for them, you have to kind of fire them up in a different sort of way. So there's nuances around the differences, but there's similarities in terms of the staging posts of this journey.
So if I've understood that there's a safety response, that I'm trying to make myself safe by closing down certain systems.
Yeah.
And then hopefully in most cases, because those traumas are rare, there's a sort of bounce back,
yeah,
to this enlivened state.
Yeah.
But in some cases, because of a history, because of the particular effect of the trauma, there may be a need for a nurturing and encouraging to come back out of that de-sparking state. And that's to do with safening, and it's to do with community.
It's to do with connection.
Okay.
So absolutely. So emotional connection. So the thing that will give rise to safeness as opposed to safety. Safety will be the fleeing from. Safeness, a kind of sense in our being, in ourselves, will come from emotional connection. So it starts early in life. If you're a crying, screaming baby that's left on your own, you're not going to feel very safe or at ease. When you're placed, if you're lucky and you're placed on a calm parent's, normally a mother's chest, who's breathing deeply and feels relaxed and confident, your whole nervous system will calm down. That is because of the emotional connection. Of course, these babies, when they come out, the first thing they want to do is look in the mother's eyes. They don't want to feel on the breast, as Freud once thought. When they do want to feel on the breast, but really, and that's another form of connection, but really they want eye contact, they want body contact. And that comes, as you say, from emotional connection, which is best comes from a community, because a mother can only do that if they're supported by another partner, father, another mother, or whatever, by a community, by a system around, hopefully by a good midwife or doula. Hopefully they'll go home and there'll be people around them that be loving and caring. And that's the kind of world that we want to see more of, a world in which ease and empathy and care are absolutely prioritized. And that is not the world we live in at the moment. But absolutely connection. Going back to the metaphor of the cell danger response, what happens when there's a real danger, and so the body senses a toxin or a virus or a bacterial infection or fungus or something, is the mitochondria stop producing energy, stop producing the possibility of spark, and they shut down energy production. They also stop cells communicating with each other, so there's a lack of connection. And I think it's a really wonderful metaphor for, I was just reading this morning on the way to the gym, I was listening to a bit of a book about I can't remember the name now, it's something called the mother tree, but it's about the mycorrhizal networks under the ground. And she was a forester, and she realized that lots of the trees were not growing, that were being planted for forestry to be cut down again. And that was in large part because they didn't have the benefit of the subterranean mycorrhizal communication of the fungal networks that were communicating, linking all the trees and linking each other. And it's the connection that gave rise to the growth. And we absolutely know this is the case. We know this is the case with kids. We know that actually, when kids are loved, they physically grow better. There was a syndrome called non-organic failure to thrive, which I think it might be called something else now, where kids who weren't given enough love and attention, it doesn't matter how much food you give them, they just were not growing. And it's the emotional connection that gives actually triggers all kinds of hormones, including, I think, growth hormone in the body. So these things are wonderfully, what's great is exciting at the moment is the ideas are connecting as well. And it's wonderful to be able to think about it in relation to these issues.
I mean, one thing I've noticed traveling around Europe, speaking to the people that went through this carambolage, is that some of them have formed a community, whereas others have sort of retreated off on their own. And what you're saying kind of chimes with me, that there seem to be the people that have formed a community, there seems to be a settling and a re-enlivening.
Yes.
And they also, I'm very interested in, because you mention emotions, and you mention psychic processes, but you also speak so much of the body and embodied processes. And you refer to Damasio, who, when I read that, I was like, wow, okay, we've read the same book. That this idea that emotions are not some kind of mental state, but in fact a bodily state.
Yeah, I mean, Damasio would say that very clearly, and there's always a bit of dispute in these things, but it's clear that emotions are bodily states. You can't feel anxious or angry or loving without there being a bodily correlate, and you kind of know it. I'm touching my chest. It's interesting that these things are really, really clear, but also the defenses against emotions are shutting down bodily states. So in my work, most of what I'm working with, I think, whether it's kids or adults, is working with states, repetitive states that people have got into because they were their mechanisms for not feeling feelings, that if they felt them in their bodies and whole beings, they would feel they would not have to defend against them and close down so much. So that might be an addiction to, I don't know, the internet or pornography or gambling, or it might be could be a kind of obsessional defense or whatever it might be. But if underneath that or it might be self-harming, if underneath that there's a feeling that I might be able to face, which is actually I'm harming myself because I want to be a nice person, but actually my parents hated me, were very unkind to me, and I need to be in touch with the anger that's simmering beneath that I'm trying to avoid because I want to pretend to be nice, because that was my way of getting through. But if I can be in touch with that anger and feel it in my body, I'll be freed up. There'll be much more connectivity. Interesting, anger is one of those emotions that is upward rising, comes out. So it links with actually, so the meaning of the word aggression, of course, from the Latin is to move towards. And what we see in closing down is moving in, turning away. So I think these things are all wonderfully linked, and you can't, so emotions are bodily processes, and a lot of the ways of coping are by not feeling emotions.
I wonder if, as a therapist, you explore perhaps embodied processes of recovery. And I'm thinking here about just a little comment you made in an interview about working with a client, a patient, and playing football with them. Or am I remembering that correctly?
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's one of the it's one of the costs of being a child psychotherapist. You end up playing a lot of football if you're not careful with a kid who doesn't actually want to think about emotions. But one of the interesting things about, can't remember the interview, but one of the things about that kind of example is that there was a kid I worked with, and it might have been this, who I thought we were doing really fantastic trauma work in which he was reenacting scary traumatic scenes from his a very, very, very abusive childhood. He was now in foster care by the time I saw him. And I was feeling very good. I'm a really good therapist here. We're doing this great work. And then I found out that when he got home, he was having nightmares and some flashbacks and started reenacting things in school again. And I realized that I'd gone too far, that actually he wasn't ready to reenact these things, and that he needed more ordinary safening. So there's this period in middle childhood, which you may or may not have gone through. Some of us did and some of us didn't, but it's often associated with it, because I'm quite old, it was associated in my day with things like stamp collecting and playing conkers and stuff like that, where actually there's not too much wild emotion, but also you're learning about social and emotional, communication between people and stuff. Kids who've had a lot of trauma often are deprived of that because they can't be calm enough to do those ordinary, boring things. So my price for helping him become more ordinary and dulled down and safe in a way was to play a lot of football, which is a reciprocal thing. It's person to person, it's body to body. We're kind of meeting each other's eyes a bit. We're regulating each other. And interesting, it's left-right hemisphere linking as well. But it allowed him to feel safe enough to then, within some months later, be able to process the traumatic experiences in a completely different way, in a way in which they were processed from a kind of a bigger part of him, a kind of a Hegelian way in a way. It was like the first play was a reenactment and a re-experiencing of the trauma. It wasn't actually a processing of the trauma because there was no processor in place and he didn't feel safe enough. Then we had developed this kind of safening, which was like a bit like a kind of a container, if you like, from that place of safeness, he could then spontaneously, in fact, go back to some of the traumatic incidents, and they were completely different in the way they were reenacted in his play.
That's fascinating, because part of our practice is we're very interested in what's recognized as art and what isn't. So what the institutions of art are willing to treat as a commodity. So in the past, we've worked with women's institutes, baking cakes, and the cakes have then been the artwork, the exhibition.
Wow.
And one thing that we noticed in meeting the survivors of the carambolage is that quite a lot of them had started to have a process of making, and they've become part of the exhibition. So, for example, one person has been making croissant and has been exploring all the different recipes for croissant. And talking to them, they kind of came out that on the day of the crash, they had a croissant which was really bad. So somehow they weren't dealing with the crash itself, but making the croissant. Another person, an ambulance driver, went back to going back to the stamp collecting, something that he did as a boy, which was making and painting toy cars.
So interesting. So that it might well be a kind of, in a way, you might think about it in different ways. You might think about it as a kind of regression in the latter case, somebody returning to a safe place, a safe experience in their being, in their body, where there was no serious danger. But also toy cars is interesting given the incident. This was like toy safe cars. The croissant, who knows, but they were making something nurturing and fairly and who knows what the associations were of croissants for this particular person. But I do think there's something in the ordinary which has to be, you have to trust in the ordinary. I mean, if you're a kind of Zen monk, you probably think everything is really chopping wood and lighting fires or whatever, but it's but there's something of the importance of trusting in the ordinary and it not being too terrifying. That is a really important point on the way to trauma recovery. And of course, many people have known this, like occupational therapists. I happen to be married to an occupational therapist, and I think it's the most underrated profession, because what they're doing is they're doing things with people in hospitals. They're helping them do drawings, make things, do clay, cook, garden, all those things, and they're fantastic and fantastically nurturing, of course, especially if you see an end result. So the work actually with things like animals or gardening is fantastically helpful, because you see these literal seeds sprouting into life, and that's a wonderful metaphor for what we hope. You go underground for a while, like we do in the winter, and then these seeds sprout up and grow and flourish. So I think this is a really interesting way of thinking about it.
And again, you've come up with another fantastic metaphor, as you do throughout the book, which is that you've just come up with a perfect metaphor for getting through life's darkness.
Yes.
Thank you so much. It's been wonderful to talk to you.
It's been really, really interesting. Thank you.